Welcome Tarnished. I wanted to make a short video about a specific subject within Elden Ring, lethality. What is lethality? Why does it matter? How does it affect you, the player? This isn't exactly a PvP based discussion about the subject. I wanted to cover every angle I could. While I know status damage has been talked about to death, this is more of the basis of damage in general for both players and enemies alike. Before we get into this, we have to talk about a specific phrase in which many RPGs tend to have: power creep. What is power creep? Power creep is usually referred to whenever a new expansion or patch is introduced to the game that introduces new items or abilities that leave the older ones useless or underpowered. However, it also is in relation to the snowball effect when it comes to RPGs in general. I want to compare Elden Ring's power to Dark Souls, but I will try my best not to make too many direct correlations since the games are not part of the same franchise or universe. While being previously Souls-like titles, I think Elden Ring can stand on its own merits and rules, considering the game has been out for so long. In previous Soul games, weapon upgrades stopped at plus 10 and plus 15. Depending on the title we are comparing it to, though that specific detail doesn't really matter. In Elden Ring, the max a normal weapon can achieve is plus 25. Many who have played the older Souls titles may ask why is that, and I think the answer usually stems from it's an open world, which to be fair is a great point. Though I want to touch on this specifically within Elden Ring. Why is it such a high number? I noticed around Altus, the game's scaling starts becoming quite ridiculous for both players and the enemy NPCs. Bosses start having massive damaging abilities, and the mechanics for bosses are also specifically more challenging compared to the early game. Again, the bosses becoming harder makes sense as the game progresses, at least mechanically I feel. The damage is my focus here. At this point in the game, the player should be around level 80, 90 with a plus 15 or a plus 6 somber weapon, as a melee player has access to these things: winged sword insignia, claw talisman, and golden vow. Enough for food buffs that boost attack, as well as other consumables. I am sure I missed a few things if someone was indeed being as efficient as possible, but I'm trying to look at it from a normal playthrough perspective for most players. The reason I mention an incantation is because Elden Ring pushes the player to always be using some sort of magic, whether it be faith, arcane, or intelligence. Pure builds are possible, but from my experience most players are hybrid melee spellcasters. I would mention pure mages, but I am not a wizard player, nor do I think it needs to be said how strong pure mages are with the Cerulean Hidden Tier. We have all seen it, whether that be in our own games or via YouTube. Anyways, so we have a plus 15 weapon, which is not including stats of the player's character, hovers around 200 to 400 AR for a standard upgrade depending on which class it is, save for daggers and the like. Most players at this point will come to realize that jump attacks are not only safe, but very powerful and inflict quite a bit of poise damage to the bosses and enemies they come across. You get 15% from the claw talisman, 10% from the winged sword insignia, and 15% from the golden vow. With everything being multiplicative in nature within Elden Ring, that allows the players to have an overwhelming snowball effect in PvE and PvP. I have shown in my Bestial Fury video that even with claws you can ramp up damage at level 90 nearly instantly, and I wasn't even using golden vow. So the answer to this is obvious: to make the PvE more powerful to compensate for the given power to the player since it's an open world, and there's no way to really regulate what people can and cannot get by simply playing the game. I'm not going to get into specifics of math since other channels have done it much better than I have, and I will leave those channels in the description of the video. I will also assume most players at this point in Elden Ring's life cycle understand the nuances of the game and how to squeeze damage from nearly every aspect of a build. Moving on to my point. In the previous titles, the damage was pretty intense at endgame if you made a decent build. You could pump out reasonable and respectable damage in both PvE and PvP. In Elden Ring, however, you become a literal god before you even hit mid-late game, one-shotting most enemies that are not elite or hard enemies with minor mechanics. Bosses become more of a DPS race for most players since mechanics start becoming extremely punishing during second phases, which is why a lot of players suffered from Malekith and Commander Nile. Personally, Nile felt more like a traditional Dark Souls boss to me, but I digress. This isn't me complaining that the game is hard. I much enjoy the game after playing through it 5 times, but the point I am making is from a value standpoint. Realistically, you can just not get hit, right? I know. But we were all bound to get smacked around once or twice in our second or third playthrough compared to the first when we were still learning. Why does it matter? Because it means that in order to create a balance between players' power and the difficulty of the game, From Software needed a way to make barriers and skill checks for the players. That works in a perfect world, but with Bleed, Frost, buff stacking, Ashes of War benefiting from all three, we come to the conclusion of kill it as fast as possible with overwhelming power. It isn't as hard to make a build that deals insane damage. Any weapon can really manage it, and I think that is a deeper issue. I cannot really get into it with my knowledge on the game without digging way deeper into the specifics of percentages and values like other channels do. So how does it affect you? Well, it shouldn't matter how I play the game, right? It shouldn't matter what my build is, or how I beat this boss. In the end of the day, we all got a game to enjoy and have fun with, no? Of course. However, this creates a sort of a vacuum in which potency fills in when it comes to the feel and reality of it. You can feel good about your playthrough in a number of ways, but the game does so by allowing you to do all sorts of insane feats. There is nothing wrong with the visuals of it and the aspects of having these sort of moments at all. In fact, I genuinely think spells are awesome in this game despite most of them being overshadowed by 3 major DPS spells. The reality of it is, in order to have more normal things keep up with all the demigod abilities, they need to do more damage. Thus our greatsword becomes the slayer of all, that dare to tread in our wake as if we're the end of times coming, only to keep up with the actual god killer weapons and spells within the game. In PvE, this only creates a serious issue whenever you are early to coming into mid-game. Most people seem to focus on 2 stats and leveling them equally to do more damage. In fact, I know this is the case because as an invader and a co-opper, I have come across more hosts with the base level of vigor than most. While this can be considered an effect of the state of the game, I think it's an effect of the overall experience. Again, I shouldn't have to say it, but I do not think doing a lot of damage and decimating bosses is boring. Creating a build and having it come together is what this game does best, and that's what most people enjoy. But I want to express that coming into multiplayer, it breaks literally everything. Summons carrying hosts through boss fights that personally sours the experience and doesn't let the game do what it does best. Teach the player to break their own limits and push through challenges and have that incredible feeling of accomplishment of defeating something hard, or challenging. I'm not going to argue semantics about I don't like spending X time on boss. It doesn't feel rewarding at all to die over and over again. Maybe the game isn't for you at this point. I am also not arguing against co-op. I think this game missed out on the multiplayer period, and I hope that changes in the expansion Shadows of the Erdtree. The issue carries over into PvP, as it's almost impossible to not build something extremely lethal unless you're gimping yourself with a roleplay build or limiting yourself with just one singular weapon. Skill in this game matters, I will say, and I will never be as good as someone like G9 or Chase the Bro. I strive to do better each time I invade, and I've gotten pretty good results as the time goes on. However, for the normal invader, it is chock full of the same experiences because of lethality. You will always come across a hybrid mage, or someone using bleed, or frost, or some status effect. While status effects can be mended further with not building up on dodging, I think it comes from a deeper rooted problem that the game has in general. This creates a very stale meta in both PvE and PvP as the players will gravitate towards these setups. Especially as an invader, you will need to have a tool to deal with nearly every situation, and even then you are left up to luck sometimes if you get staggered by a phantom hit or clipped by a spell from an unseen mage just to be evaporated. I think if the game itself had less multiplicative buffs, less power creep, and less percentage damage burst increases, it would feel a lot better in the long run of things. I know, unfortunately, the reality is that we're going to be like this until the next Souls-like From Software creates. I just like the conversation my dialogue brings in these videos to the comments. Realistically, I would think we'll keep seeing adjustments for the player-only damage, and I think that is the best course of option we have for PvP. Considering this last patch did a great job setting the foundation from before, while creating its own issues, that I'm sure the Balance team is made aware of from the content creators that are really passionate about these things and are great faces of the community. I am but a small voice, and this is but a small platform to me to voice to you all who listen. I know not everyone will agree with me, and I'm not suggesting Dark Souls 3 was the best game ever, and I personally do not want Elden Ring to return to Dark Souls 3, but learn from the previous titles that came before it. As usual, if you all have your own thoughts, leave it below, and thank you all for the support. I know this is an Elden Ring Souls channel, but I do want to branch out more and talk more with you all instead of making this montages and build showcases. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and see you in the next video. Tarnished.